And then very fortunately, for a 2-year period, and it must have coincided with a different agenda for the government bean counters, but James managed to have a conversation with someone from the Department of Work and Pensions, the people in the employment sector, and they were under real pressure to try and deliver services to what they called the absolute hardest to reach. So they'd spent years being driven by Thatcher, Tony Blair and Conservative government. And essentially the Department of Work and Pension, and it's still the same situation today, they've essentially picked off all the low-picking fruit in their world they could get and have somehow got those people back into work, either forced them back into work or supported them back into work. And everyone else was left on benefits, was people that, you know, employers were just running miles from, and they had to create soft outcomes. And we got money to help us just go on that journey, where all they were interested was having a bunch of people who've never previously started to turn up for job interviews or college interviews or anything else like that, just get to those hurdles. They didn't want anything else. They didn't put these ridiculous employment measures. They put these first step measures, and they've got a whole set of money for first step, whatever they called it in their own language. And that gave us enough money to just employ a couple of extra members of staff, just all we needed to begin to turn the ship round. We then started to have one or two of the lads who had come via the prison route who were genuine and stuck with it, and some folk, and they were all lads to start with. We didn't get into it being a mixed community for 3 or 4 years down the line. And we shipped in, some folk wanted to join from the outside, and bit by bit, the momentum built. You know, there's a day when James and I were reflecting, and all this time I'm providing James with his clinical supervision, as it were, and that's probably a grandiose expression, actually. Him and I having some very private, reflective chats. He'd always come here. You've been to my house, so he would come here, and we'd sit in that shed. You know, the shed with the climbing wall. That's him and I'd sit in supervision. It was in the shed. It was just a removed space where we could talk freely with each other, and I could really help him develop the project. And really, that was the nucleus of it. And he managed to break the back. Once the back was broke, we could have groups like AA and NA and CA that were comfortable to come and deliver some of their services. We started to get into the little bits of taking people out walking, and I think quite quickly, because it's James's passion, he'd managed to, and because it was essentially a group of lads at that point in time, he managed to get a football group going. One of the trustees early on is a semi-professional boxer, and they'd got a gym and a boxing ring in there, which was helping people with recovery. And then he started to think about doing some growing in the huge garden, and really the nucleus of what there is today started to emerge from a skin of the pants first 12-month period, when it could have gone completely peaked on. One person did die, there was one overdose and stuff like that, but they were all events that would have happened, weren't of the way in which we'd started. It was just the nature of the residents that initially were being housed. And of course, what became very different quite quickly was that once North Wales Recovery Community was set up and charged, and we were independent, and we weren't taking drug and alcohol money, and there was no criminal justice money involved, and we weren't taking any of the statutory drug money in any way, we were then able to begin to set the terms of who became the residents, and we could choose a different criteria. So we weren't housing the people that the other agencies couldn't cope with, rather than beginning to work with the people who wanted recovery. And it's that subtle difference. Yes. It's that subtle difference. A lot of what the third sector ends up doing is picking up the stuff that other people can't cope with, or when they've finished with them, or whatever else. And what was really important, and it was so important, and the number of conversations with James, we just needed to, and he got to that threshold when the folk there were it was because they were choosing recovery. That didn't mean they were all successful at it in the first instance. It still took some time, but they were starting in the right place. And then, you know, very obviously and quickly, the 3 or 4 staff that James relied on were in recovery themselves. One of them was our common friend Hugh, that had helped start up Agro.
Hugh Harris.
Hugh Harris worked as one of the workers there for a while, and so so the workers themselves, who were essentially just housing support workers to start with before they could become the recovery community workers, but they were also in recovery themselves. And so, and that's really that, from my perspective, how it started. Really, it started with one person's combination of seeing everything they thought was wrong with the system and also having a vision about what something alternative would have. Being pushed into it a little bit through a desperation episode, but through a desire episode. And if this hadn't happened, James may have walked away from everything, who knows? But but quickly enough, and very importantly for the long-term success of it, and I would say it's really important today, the community rapidly became, everyone identified it as North Wales Recovery Community, and it was something that James was doing, but actually, from James's point of view, there was just more than James. Coming back to our conversation, it wasn't just him. It wasn't just one person's ego. It wasn't subject to his ups and downs in mental health or anything else. You know, because it's been an incredibly stressful journey for him for 8 years, and there have been periods when it's been, you know, you know, and again, those are conversations that we've had privately here to some degree. And yeah, so that's those first kind of 2 years, really. You know, or 3 years. There's a year leading up to it, which is all about working stuff out, knowing not just what you're running from, but what it is that you want to run to or set up. It's important that both bits of it were really important. And then the first scary 12 months in just getting even from A to kind of A1. It wasn't even at B by then. It was just getting to the first other place. And then getting to B. B was the moment that actually James and I could sit in the supervision, and he would say to me, well, actually, I think of the 16 or 17 people living in Penryn today, I actually think 8 or 9 of them are now active in recovery. I think the balance has tipped, and we're on our way. Yes. And it's getting to that moment when the scales tipped. And from there on, it's at one level, it's almost been no looking back. There's been some very dodgy moments. They've been financial, and occasionally they've been political with a micro P. But yeah, it's been brilliant since then. Yes.